Welcome to this biology webinar session. This webinar will cover all three sections in chapter 32 in the biology textbook, which is part of lesson 5. We'll be going over the skeletal, muscular, and integumentary systems. So this chapter covers these three different organ systems, the skeletal, muscular, and integumentary systems. Remember that these systems are made of organs. Organs are structures made of closely related tissues that work together. So each bone in your body is an organ. Each muscle is an organ. Your skin is an organ. It's considered the largest organ on your body. So this diagram showing part of the skeletal system shows labels 4 of the different organs that make up that system. So some invertebrates have a support structure on the outside called an exoskeleton, but humans are vertebrates. So we have an internal skeleton called an endoskeleton made up of bone and cartilage. So it has several jobs. Its jobs are to hold the body parts in place, protect organs, work with muscles to allow the body to move, and it also makes red blood cells in the red bone marrow, which we'll talk about in a little bit. The adult human skeleton is made up of 206 bones. The bones of the arms and legs are collectively referred to as the appendicular skeleton, while the more central bones are referred to as the axial skeleton. Your bones are made up of living cells, along with protein fibers and inorganic mineral salts. There are tubes through the bones called haversian canals, which run through the bone and contain nerves and blood vessels. And many bones have marrow in the center, and there are 2 types of marrow. Red bone marrow creates red blood cells, and yellow bone marrow stores fat. The outside of the bone is covered with a membrane called periosteum. Cartilage is the softer, flexible substance around bones. Adults have cartilage cushioning their joints, but early in development, a human fetus has a skeleton made almost entirely of cartilage instead of a bone tissue. Throughout fetal development and childhood, the cartilage is replaced by bone. The process is called ossification. It is carried out by cells called osteoblasts. So this diagram on the right shows a child at birth, and all of the blue parts of the skeleton are still cartilage. So you can see most of the joints are still made of cartilage instead of bone. And this diagram down here shows how the percentage changes as children grow up. So at 4 months old, the end of this bone is still mostly cartilage. At 4 years, the areas of bone are getting bigger and cartilage is getting smaller. And by the time they're an adult, there's just a little rim of cartilage around the edge. Now, bones have different types of structure in them. A bone is not uniform throughout the structure. Spongy bone has spaces between the cells, but it can support a lot of force. The spaces in spongy bone contain red bone marrow. Then compact bone has less spaces. Between the cells, there's not many spaces, but it does contain the haversian canals, which have blood vessels and nerves. And then in growing children and teens, near the ends of the bones are areas called growth plates. And these are areas that have cartilage instead of bone, And these cartilage cells reproduce, pushing outward, creating more tissue. They're increasing the size of the bone. So the growth plate is here, and it grows cartilage this way, pushing out the end of the bone. Um, so those keep growing, which allows your bones to grow and make the child grow into an adult. So even once they're fully grown, bones are living organs and they are constantly under repair. So throughout life, osteoclasts break down old bone tissue and osteoblasts rebuild bone tissue. And normally this is balanced and the bone tissue remains healthy. But when a disorder causes the bone tissue to be broken down faster than it can be rebuilt, this is called osteoporosis. This weakens the bones. And to prevent this, a diet high in calcium and weight-bearing exercises such as walking are recommended. Those things help the bones to keep growing or keep being repaired, rather. Now we'll talk about the places where two bones meet, and those are called joints. And there's different types of joints. So the three basic types are removable joints, such as those in the skull, that have bones that have been fused together so they can't move at all. Then there's slightly movable joints, such as those between the vertebrae, that each allow for a small amount of motion and just kind of flex back and forth. And then freely movable joints allow for a lot of movement in at least two directions. So for freely movable joints, you can think of the joints in your arms and legs. And then we can get a bit more specific because there's several types of freely movable joints. So within that category, we're going to break it down even further. A hinge joint, such as those in the elbows and knees, allows the limbs to bend and straighten. And then pivot joints, such as where the head meets the neck, allows for rotation. Ball and socket joints, such as the shoulder and the hip, allow a wide range of motion. Your arm can be swung in almost any direction due to the ball and socket of the shoulder. And saddle joints allow for sliding in two directions. This type of joint allows your thumb to slide and move across your palm. Freely movable joints have to be well protected and still allow easy motion. The surfaces between the two bones at a joint are covered with cartilage to cushion them. And a joint capsule contains two layers. Ligaments are tough tissue that attaches to the bones, holding them together. And synovial fluid is in the joint capsule, acting as a lubricant between the bones and acting as a shock absorber. Now that brings us to the end of section 1, so here's a couple of review questions. You don't need to answer these, you can just follow along with the recording here, and I'll give you some time to think about the answers. So which of these is made of cartilage? Spongy bone, compact bone, growth plate, or periosteum? Okay, so spongy bone and compact bone, they're both made of bone, not cartilage. So the spongy bone has more spaces between the cells, but it's still bone. The growth plate is the correct answer. That's an area of cartilage in the bone where the cartilage cells are constantly reproducing and making the bone bigger. And then eventually those cartilage cells that are being made get replaced with bone cells by osteoblasts. And the third option there, or the last option there, periosteum, that's the covering on the outside of the bone. And section 2 of this chapter is about muscles and the muscular system. There are three different types of muscles in the body. Skeletal muscles are the ones connected to your bones that make your body move. These muscles are striated. Striated means they look striped under a microscope. They also have more than one nucleus in each cell, and they have very long, thin cells. So when we talk about muscle fibers, they're usually talking about those long muscle cells. Smooth muscle cells are used in involuntary movement, such as expanding and contracting your blood vessels and moving your food through the digestive system. They're called smooth muscles because they do not have the stripes when viewed under a microscope. They look pretty smooth. And the third type is cardiac muscle. This is found only in the heart, and it controls the involuntary pumping of the heart, but it is striated like skeletal muscle. So what do muscles do to actually move your body? How do they make your bones and other body parts move? Well, they do this by contracting, which means making themselves shorter. Your skeletal muscles are attached to bones by tendons. So when they contract, they pull the bones with them. And it's important to know that muscles can't push, only pull. So to work, your skeletal muscles work in pairs to allow motion. So the biceps contract to bend the arm, like it is in this picture, but then the biceps can't push it back. So in order to straighten the arm at the elbow, the triceps contract to straighten it back out while the biceps relax. So when they contract, they pull, and they can't push, they can just relax and let another muscle group pull in the opposite direction. And that's what's happening in our second side. The triceps are pulling, and because they're connected down here, the triceps can pull and pull the bottom of your arm and pull it straight as long as the biceps relax. So let's look at it a little more in depth. How does this happen? What makes a muscle cell or muscle contract? Well, all muscles contract by using the same structures and process. Muscle fibers are tightly packed with bundles called myofibrils, and each myofibril is made of two kinds of filaments, actin and myosin. Actin filaments are bound to each other, and they have myosin filaments in between them. The whole structure is called a sarcomere. When a muscle contracts, the myosin connects to the actin, pulling the actin toward the center of the sarcomere. As this happens, the whole fiber gets shorter, and when it happens in many muscle fibers at once, the whole muscle is contracted. And this process uses a lot of ATP, which is the energy-carrying molecule made in cellular respiration. It kind of fuels everything happening in a cell. And that's the end of section 2, so we've got a couple more review questions. So again, I'll read these and give you a few seconds to think about the answer and then show you what the answers are. So this question is matching the type of muscle to its description. So we have cardiac muscle, we have skeletal muscle, we have smooth muscle, and then the descriptions are on the right. So think about what each one is for about 15 seconds. Okay, so the first one, cardiac muscle. That is striated muscle that controls the involuntary pumping of the heart. Okay, so it's cardiac, it's in the heart. Then we have skeletal muscle. That is striated muscle that makes voluntary motions of body parts. And then we have smooth, that's the non-striated muscle. and it controls other involuntary movements. Again, things like breathing, digesting, your blood vessels moving, getting bigger and smaller, things like that. And another review question, how do muscles actually move? And our choices are muscles move by pushing, I got that backwards, okay. Muscles move by pushing the actin filaments out. Sorry about that. So that's option A. B, muscles relax when the sarcomere shortens. C, muscles contract when the myosin pulls the actin filaments toward the center of the sarcomere. Or D, muscles contract when the actin pulls the myosin towards the center of the sarcomere. So I'll give you a few seconds to think about that one. All right. So let's think about these. Muscles move by doing which of the following? So our first option is definitely not correct. Why? Because muscles can't push. So remember, muscles can only pull. And in order to make the body part that they're moving go back, they have to have another muscle group that pulls the other way to fix it. They can't push. So the first one's definitely out. Second one, muscles relax when the sarcomere shortens. So I'll just go, well, I don't need to go back. It'll come up. The sarcomere is that structure of actin and myosin. And what we saw on the previous slide, and we'll see again in a second, is when it contracts, the sarcomere shortens. So when it contracts, it's all getting squished together. When it relaxes, it doesn't necessarily move when it relaxes, but if it relaxes and then another muscle group pulls on it, then it will just kind of get pulled apart again. So when they relax, the sarcomere does not shorten. When they contract, it shortens. And so this is the sarcomere, again, the whole thing, the actin and the myosin. And it leaves us with our last two options here. Do muscles contract when the myosin pulls the actin towards the center, or when the actin pulls the myosin towards the center? Well, the myosin is already in the center, and then it grabs onto the actin and pulls the actin towards the center. Okay, so that answer is correct. The muscles contract when myosin pulls the actin filaments toward the center of the sarcomere. And section 3 is about the integumentary system. The integumentary system is made of skin, hair, nails, and several glands. It has several important functions. So first is protection. Skin and hair prevent dirt and germs and damaging objects and damaging rays from the sun from reaching the sensitive parts inside of the body. Second, the skin helps keep the body's temperature stable. It allows sweat to happen, help cool you down. It gives signals to your blood vessels to help decide whether they should cool down or get warmer. Skin removes waste through sweat. So sweat is both for cooling you down and for removing waste from your body. Gathers information through touch. So you have a lot of nerve cells in your skin to help you figure out what's going on around you. And skin uses sunlight to create vitamin D from a similar molecule that we can't use, but we can use the vitamin D. The skin has distinct layers and structures. The outer layer is called the epidermis. And the epidermis is just kind of layers of tough cells. The cells at the bottom of the epidermis divide really quickly, and they push older cells up towards the outer surface. And these older cells toughen up with keratin, and then they die, creating a tough barrier that's the outside layer of your skin. Below the epidermis is the dermis, which has muscles, nerves, hair follicles, sweat bands, and sebaceous glands. Sebaceous glands make sebum, which keeps the epidermis flexible and waterproof. And there's blood vessels in the dermis that expand and contract to help regulate body temperature. The third bottom layer is the hypodermis. And the hypodermis contains a lot of glands and fat cells. Important part of skin is melanin. Melanin is a brown pigment in the skin which protects the skin from sun damage. The more melanin a skin has, the darker it is, and exposure to the sun produces more melanin, making the skin temporarily darker. So that's what this image is showing. On the right is skin that has not been exposed to the sun. It has these melanocytes here, which are making the melanin. And you can see that there's some melanin in there, but it's pretty light all around. And on the left, this is skin that has been suntanned. So you've got the melanocytes here, and they're making lots and lots of melanin. And because there's so much melanin distributed throughout the skin, the overall skin is darker. Now, a reason this is concerning is that damage to the melanocytes, which are the cells producing the melanin, can produce a dangerous type of cancer called melanoma. And melanoma can spread to other organs in the body and cause death. There's two other types of skin cancer, which are basal cell carcinoma and squamous cell carcinoma, and those rarely spread to other organs, but they can cause tissue damage where they occur. So the big concern is too much damage from the sun, damaging those melanocytes and causing melanoma. And that's actually it for skin, so we've got two more review questions. So this one should be pretty fresh in your mind because we just talked about it, which is not true about melanocytes. Okay, so 3 of these are true, 1 of them isn't. So they produce a pigment called melanin. When skin is exposed to sunlight, they make the skin darker. Damage to them can cause melanoma. They produce sebum, which waterproofs the skin. I'll give you a few seconds to think about which one is not true. So the first 3 are true. So again, melanocytes are the cells that produce melanin. So you're going to probably notice as we go through all of these lessons about the human body, the word cytes, or the suffix cytes, means cells. So it's a type of cells. So melanocytes are the cells that produce melanin. And yes, when skin is exposed to sunlight, they make the skin darker. And damage to melanocytes can cause cancer called melanoma. And the thing they don't do is produce sebum, which waterproofs the skin. That's done by sebaceous glands. Oh, there you go. Sebaceous glands do that, not melanocytes. And one more review questions. Order these layers of skin from the outside to the inside. So which one's on the top, on the outside of your body, which one's in the middle, and which one's on the bottom? I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. And our answer is epidermis is the top layer, the outside. Again, it's mostly dead skin cells that are acting as a barrier to protect you. Under that is the dermis, and the layer beneath that is the hypodermis. And that brings us to the end of this chapter. So if you have any questions, we definitely encourage you to contact your instructor. There's ways to call and email us.